on the current crime situation, but with us now a former citizen security advisor to the government of St. Lucia, Mr. Giovanni James, attorney at law. He's also a former advisor at the Regional Security Service, RSS. Mr. James, thanks for staying with us. You were touting the benefits of going after the proceeds of crime as a civil matter. If it were to be a criminal matter, you would need to prove using solid evidence that the proceeds were generated through association with criminal activity.
Yes, you would, Shannon. And one of the things that you would need as well is witnesses. You would need to actually prove that, in fact, the monies or the assets came from a crime. And in many instances, it is difficult and sometimes almost impossible to prove the exact crime that something may have come out of. And so that mechanism has been used successfully around the world in the recovery of assets, in the prevention of crime, because money laundering legislation was developed, proceeds of crime legislation was developed as an alternative to being able to take down organized crime groups or organized crime. Because it was these crimes are so, or these organizations are so sophisticated in their operations. Okay, you talk about the mafia, for example. They were able to get some of those individuals not by getting them involved, and not by their involvement in murders and racketeering and that sort of thing, but proceeds of crime legislation.
Yep. Early on, you pointed that the approach to tackle it as a civil matter was getting pushback, a lot of pushback. You said, why would people push back on such an approach, and who are the pockets of societies who you'd find pushback coming from most?
The pushback is coming from our legislators, the people in government.
Ouch.
Those persons who would be expected to enact this legislation. And as I said, the fear was, how do we justify passing legislation that is going to take assets, take property away from individuals? It has been a hard pill to swallow. But as I said, we will get to the stage where we will have no option, because St. Lucia has signed on to various conventions where we must pass certain legislation at some point. And with the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force doing evaluations on the Caribbean as it relates to the money laundering and proceeds of crime regime, that also affects us. I would have heard Dr. Hilaire recently talking about one of the requirements is to enact legislation and have mechanisms in place to deal with the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. All of that is tied in, okay, to money laundering, the proceeds of crime regime. So we have no choice but to enact the legislation at some point. The unfortunate thing is that we have had an opportunity to get ahead of the game, and we've not taken this opportunity.
No, the legislators don't have the willpower. I'll ask you one more on that, and then some questions from our viewers as well. What is available now in the Caribbean region? You can start in the OECS and then take it across to CARICOM for us to do our monitoring and surveillance and interagency collaboration in monitoring proceeds of crime and even enforcing legislation in that regard.
Shannon, you have in every OECS state in the entire Caribbean, you have departments that are responsible for the investigation of proceeds of crime matters. There's actually an informal network which was created during my stint at the RSS. It's called ARIN Carib, which is an informal network of all stakeholders, not just from an investigative angle, but also from a prosecutorial angle, that is part of this network. And this Caribbean network is also linked to every other asset recovery informal network in the world. So I can tell you, just I think it was last week, the Iron Carib concluded its annual AGM. So you have persons from Bermuda all the way down to Guyana and Trinidad being part of this network. And so the benefit of this network, and the headquarters, I can tell you, is at the RSS. You have persons who have a specific skill set who basically mentor investigators and prosecutors and conduct training throughout the Caribbean. And I can tell you, we have a very good network, Shannon. We have an extremely good network, to the point where I've had the opportunity of going all the way to Africa to deliver a talk, to deliver training to stakeholders over there.
St. Lucian Giovanni James traveling to Africa to deliver training on issues of security, issues of financial investigation and the likes. Two questions now, Giovanni, from our audience, and then we'll ask you a few more. I know you have a very busy schedule ahead, and I thank you so much for staying on. Somebody's asking, how can the government facilitate these criminals to engage in a legitimate business? Who are the suspects facilitating unlawful activities, including the importation of illegal firearms, etc.? It appears that we can talk but refuse to take action. I don't know if you want to quickly come in on the first part of this. How can government facilitate these criminals to engage in legitimate businesses, or have you already covered that?
Shannon, it has to be done at a community level. For example, you have the Sufre Foundation, right? You may have crime taking part in certain parts of Sufre. We are not saying that you go and then you just hand a bag of money to a gang leader and say, hey, use this for the guys and set up a business. We are saying through engagement, through positive engagement, you use established institutions, community-based institutions, to set up employment and entrepreneurship opportunities. For example, you have, I remember, I'm from Migu South, by way of example, Shannon, and I remember growing up, the Catholic Church had a carpentry and joinery workshop that they run. Most of the carpenters or joiners in that community, they develop their skills from that center. These individuals did not have to pay to learn that skill, but they have become amongst the best in the South in relation to carpentry and joinery. And so we need to be looking at those initiatives. We should not wait for others to come in and do it. I saw a news item on the mushroom farm, by way of example. We can think of opportunities using community agencies to do it. We have institutions like RISE. We have the different clubs in the different communities. Let us utilize them. Let us utilize them. We're not saying give money to the criminals. We're saying provide them with opportunities so that they are going to be engaged positively as opposed to engaging in crime.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Giovanni. Contribution from our WhatsApp platform. Good morning, Shannon. Excellent contribution by your guest. Where does Mr. James work? Does he provide any service or advice to the government of St. Lucia?
Shannon, I was hoping to avoid this question. But I was really hoping to avoid this question. I am in private practice right now. My previous role was that of the Citizen Security Advisor. I was recruited pretty much from the RSS. I was at the RSS serving as advisor when I was recruited by the former head of the Performance Management Delivery Unit, along with former Commissioner Mr. Mosheri. It was felt that with my skill set, knowledge, background, I would have been able to contribute towards the development of initiatives and strategies and policies to assist in crime fighting in St. Lucia. However, as has happened in many cases, and I don't think it is unique to just this government, it happens all the time. When the government changed, my contract was terminated. I have offered my services indirectly. I continue to offer my services indirectly. And when I say offer, I'm not saying that I'm actually doing anything, but offering to make my time available, make my knowledge and experience available. I have engaged with non-profit organizations, like I seek to work with RISE, because genuinely, Shannon, I am not interested in the politics. I am affected by crime in St. Lucia. I think we have a number of persons in St. Lucia who can lend their experience and expertise, and they have a responsibility. And I'm calling on them actually to step forward, as I have decided to. I can tell you I'm not someone who likes to be in the spotlight, Shannon. But having realized that I was not getting anywhere in terms of being able to offer my services, I took the bold decision to come on your program and to share with the rest of St. Lucia, okay, to learn from the rest of St. Lucia in terms of how we can better deal with the crime situation in St. Lucia.
Thanks a lot. I'm not going to muddy the waters anymore, but writer, to be frank, Mr. James, who is a well-trained and qualified, has provided extensive service across the Caribbean in training law enforcement personnel, as well, a former advisor with the regional security system, RSS. He was recently with the government of St. Lucia. To be frank, he's not going to say it in those words, but I will say it. His contract was terminated. He has provided the option of him providing his service to the government of St. Lucia. However, the powers that be at the moment don't seem interested in his engagement, so he's doing public service now by engaging via this platform and others to share his thoughts, to share his experience on how we can address the current situation here. Somebody saying, good job, very informative, Mr. James. Another contribution, and then we continue and wind down this segment. Jimmy Fletcher, Dr. Jimmy Fletcher, former government minister, is on next. He'll be talking about crime. Richie Sutherland is saying, very interesting discussion this morning. First sensible and intelligent discourse on crime prevention since the increase in the spate of homicides. The office of the Prime Minister would not agree with you, Richie. All business should be subject to reporting to the FIU, the Financial Investigations Unit, completion of DSF. He goes on, if you hit the criminal where he feels it most, that is in his pockets, and provide, like Mr. James has alluded to, then we will begin to see a reduction in major crime, because it is no longer possible to profit from crime. We have a FIU, a Financial Investigation Unit here, and we have been working hard on solving financial crime. Great show. Thanks for that contribution. Again, we big up the staff and the officers at the FIU. From all accounts, you continue to register the most successes in seizures across the OECS and Barbados included. So although your stories are not told as frequently and as loudly as they should, we note your successes. So the team at FIU, good morning. Continue your excellent service on behalf of the people of St. Lucia. Mr. James, you still with us?
Yes, I am.
I'll hold you for 5 more minutes if your schedule permits me, please. Earlier on, we were discussing the value of perhaps our police officers utilizing the body cams on operations, and we could know the benefit that it would have had during the 2011 period, where we now have the impacts report and impacts investigation still looming over a number of our heads. Other devices which can be used, other policing infrastructure, the likes of CCTV technologies, again on the front burner of discussion, but some people fear that it will infringe on people's personal privacy. From your experience, talk about how we can utilize that technology, but still guaranteeing our citizenry that their rights will not be infringed upon.
Shannon, one of the greatest assets used in the United Kingdom is that of closed-circuit television, CCTV. You have cameras everywhere. I don't think there's any invasion of privacy, because these cameras are not aimed inside of people's homes, but it covers the outside. And one of the initiatives that I can say I hope is still ongoing is that there is a project which started under the former administration, that is the KLED project, where what the government was seeking to do is to replace all street lighting with LED lighting. And out of that, they would be getting tremendous savings, because the government has to pay for street lighting.
I think some $20 million annually just on street lights.
Yes. The savings that would be generated from the LED lighting was earmarked to be used for cameras throughout St. Lucia. And I can tell you, Shannon, I have seen the demonstration of these cameras and I am impressed. And I will give you one example. The way these cameras are set up is that it is linked to artificial intelligence software that has tremendous capabilities. If a crime were to be committed in the city of Castries, by way of example, and the individual was described as having a red shirt, black pants, white shoes, you could actually give a command to the software, to the program, asking for it to search for everybody with the description that I've just given. And every single camera would commence searching. So say, for example, this individual were to be walking along Jeremy Street. The crime was committed on the boulevard, but when this person got to the boulevard, this person would have put on a mask or a bandana to cover the face. With the use of these cameras, it would pick up every single individual matching this description. And so it can provide the opportunity for the police to be able to identify this individual before he would have put on this mask. You have what is called ANPR cameras, and the intention of that was to link it to the Department of Transport, where license plates would be scanned by those cameras. And if there is any anomaly, say for example, the license plate does not match the make, model, description of this vehicle, it would flag it. And so the intention was, and what I want to say is that there was extensive discussion and collaboration with the Royal St. Lucia Police Force in terms of the specifications on what they would have wanted. You have hunter cameras, you have cameras with the capacity to zoom to quite a distance. And so for me, that would have assisted significantly. I also wanted the government to publicize or to come up with duty-free concessions for business owners, for private homeowners on security systems, on camera systems, with the one condition that there must be a camera covering the outside or the street area. Shannon, can you imagine the capabilities the police would have because these cameras would be running 24/7. The electricity used to run those cameras would not be a cost to the government.
It's a household.
That would be incurred by the business owners and civilians, just on the condition that if any crime is committed and your camera were to pick it up, that the police would have access to the footage that they can use. And so I think this would be a brilliant idea. And that the cameras are just one of the initiatives. I can tell you that another initiative that we were looking at, and I'm hoping that it can be implemented, is the use of GPS tracking on all vessels registered in St. Lucia. There was discussion, and what I want to say, Shannon, before I even continue, is that I believe that engagement is key. If the government intends on doing anything that is going to affect a certain sector, that sector should be involved in the discussion and the decision-making process. So I can tell you that we would have had discussions with the fisher folk, for example, as it relates to the installation of GPS tracking on all fishing vessels. There's a dual purpose to that. It would allow for tracking. It would allow for tracking of vessels. It would allow for security purposes in terms of safety and security.
Absolutely.
We've heard so many times families complaining about relatives being lost at sea. With this sort of GPS tracking, it is satellite tracking. So it reduces the instances of someone being lost at sea and not being able to be found, because you could use this device to send an SOS. It can be used for fisheries purposes, and the options are so many, Shannon. However, devices were purchased and it's not being installed, because what is required is a simple amendment to the legislation to make this device part of the safety equipment. That is all that is required.
And the proposal was that the state would have funded that investment. I'm very much interested because it's a sector that that I am part of now. Consultation would be key, as you spoke of, but I can see the benefit, especially for the safety of fishers who venture out, having such a device in the event that you go adrift or have some engine problems. And on the other hand, it benefits the state because we identify that we have very porous borders, and a lot of the illegal firearms are not coming through the airports, but are rather coming through our porous borders. Many of them extend around the island, so I see the benefit there. Interesting proposal. Consultation would be key, so hopefully we can get an update sooner rather than later on that. One more question, then I'll let you go, Giovanni. Recently, the Deputy Prime Minister, also acting right now, Honorable Dr. Ernest Hill, touted that although we are not manufacturers of guns, we still see heavy numbers here. We know where the firearms are coming from. Majority of them are coming from and off the Venezuelan coast. They come from the United States and elsewhere as well. The minister is speaking about lobbying the gun manufacturers and holding them accountable. How far off is that?
Shannon, I want to correct something. The intelligence shows that most of the guns coming into St. Lucia are coming in through our legitimate ports.
Our legitimate ports?
Yes, via barrels, in appliances. It's coming in through our legitimate ports out of America.
Legitimate ports out of America?
Yes. There are not many firearms. There are firearms coming in via Venezuela, but the cost of those firearms coming out of the States is next to nothing compared to a Venezuelan vessel coming and dropping off guns. That used to happen maybe 10 years ago.
Okay.
But now most of the firearms are coming in. For example, you would see most of the seizures taking place at our ports. 9 firearms, 12 firearms. These are just some of the firearms coming in. But the major issue is that it is coming via our legitimate ports out of the United States of America. So Dr. Hiller is correct in saying, and I guess he was informed by the intelligence, that we are not gun manufacturers, and so there must be something done by those countries that manufacture weapons to assist our region. In fact, there was a recent meeting amongst national security ministers and stakeholders recently, where they decided that, hey, the Americas and those countries providing firearms, they need to provide some level of assistance to our region. I mean, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent has been talking about this for some time. And in my research recently, I came across the fact that there's an intention to set up a regional gun violence unit, which would have the responsibility, I guess, across the region for assisting in terms of capacity building as it relates to the investigation and interception of firearms. But Shannon, you see, for me, yes, I agree with Dr. Hiller that we need to get the assistance from the Americas as well. But there's also a lot that we can do in St. Lucia.
In our own domain.
I would hope to see us having a ballistics database. So when firearms are recovered, those firearms can be, the casings or the rounds can be compared with records to see whether this firearm, which is recently recovered, was used in a previous crime or murder or that sort of thing. We need to be building capacity locally because there is nothing compelling the Americas to do anything other than to collaborate with our law enforcement agencies. And I can say to you that the collaboration is taking place. This guy who was arrested in America, by way of example, in relation to firearms, it was because of a collaborative effort between local law enforcement agencies and the Americas.
Thanks for that, Giovanni. Let's end off here for today, and then we'll reconvene at another time when your schedule permits.
Yes, if there's one thing I can say with initiatives to fighting crime, but to also manage the expectations of our people. This issue is not going to be resolved in one day or a month or a year. It is going to take some time, and it is important that persons understand that it will take some time. There are supposed to be short, medium, and long-term strategies, but it is only when we get to the long-term strategies that we can begin to see a meaningful reduction in crime, and in particular violent crimes.
Giovanni, I want to thank you for coming on, and thank you for your continued public service to us here in St. Lucia. I respect your experience and your wisdom as well, but former commissioner in Trinidad and Tobago, Gary Griffith, and I too agree with him. He says with 1 year he can get this situation under control here in St. Lucia. You think it will take a lot longer, but definitely there are things that we can get going right now. Thanks so much for sharing with us, Giovanni. We'll talk again very soon.
Thank you very much, Shannon, and wishing you a blessed day.
You as well. Attorney at law, Giovanni James. He's also the former citizen security advisor to the government of St. Lucia. He was also an advisor to the Regional Security Service, the RSS, well-trained and qualified gentleman who has provided extensive training to law enforcement personnel across the Caribbean and even internationally as well. Did some work on the African continent as well. Stay with us. Next I will bring on Dr. Jimmy Fletcher. 22 minutes before 9 o'clock. We conclude sharply at 9 today. Jimmy Fletcher is next. He will be discussing crime on St. Lucia as we continue to piece together recommendations for us to address this crime problem. Stay with us. I'll also give you an opportunity before we end to win a 30-day combo plan from telecommunications provider Flow, valued at 110 EC dollars. Good morning, St. Lucia. It's a vibe at sunrise.
After a long year of waiting, Flow brings you the magic of Christmas giving. Discounts on devices to bring you closer to your loved ones. Prizes to enjoy with your family and friends with the family. So sign up, bundle up, switch up, top up, or pay up to win $4,000 in cash or appliances plus other weekly prizes. For the best in Christmas deals and rewards.
Dining room sets, appliances, electronics, and smart devices, and more. Shop today with no cash using Quartz Ready Finance. 3 to 48-month payment plans available. Shop in-store or online at shopquartz.com. Come see what's new and take advantage of these great deals. Only at Quartz. Bringing value home. Conditions apply.
Get your clothes sparkling clean with whiter whites and brighter colors. Use Joby antibacterial washing powder. Ultra concentrated formula gives more washes with brightening factors added to keep your clothes looking new. And with the added organic fabric softener, your clothes will be soft and fluffy. Joby antibacterial washing powder. Use Joby antibacterial washing powder. My family, my love, my Joby. Available at supermarkets.
Yo, Wagwan Massive, this is your boy, Moto there, and it's all about Good Morning St. Lucia, vibes that sun, what she like, She like the chicken on the rice, chicken and rice.
But we know we get rain and even storm activity outside of the hurricane season. So whereas we're closing officially the hurricane season today, we encourage you to continue to be prepared. Let me say good morning to our viewers down in hi to everyone in Crestlands. Happy Wednesday to you all. A happy family this morning, I tell you. They want to send love, and they're sending love and congratulations to Sheldon Willie, who is a student at the St. Lucia Sports Academy, and he was recently selected as part of a team of 18 young stars to represent St. Lucia. He represents St. Lucia in the under-15 Win Lotto cricket tournament later in December. Sheldon, good morning and congratulations to you, coming from your grandmom, Paula Willie of Crestlands in Soufrière. Well done, Sheldon. We look forward to you scoring some runs and or taking some wickets and catches when the tournament bowls off in December. 17 minutes now before 8 o'clock. Before we go at 9, I'll give you another opportunity to win that 30-day combo plan compliments floats valued at $110. Let's now hear from friend of the show, former government minister, Dr. Jimmy Fletcher, who is opining now on the national crime crisis. Many citizens at home and abroad have been sharing their perspective, their recommendations and suggestions on what can be done to address the national crime crisis. Dr. Jimmy Fletcher has his 2 cents now.
I do not know that there is anything more that I can say or even want to say on the state of crime in our country, or on the scary and depressing fact that the social fabric of our country is shredding right before our eyes. If you think I'm exaggerating, have a look at the types of videos that are trending on our social media here in St. Lucia. We need more than supplications to God to put a hand, or public service announcements asking people to stop the violence. Maybe if when my good friend Dr. Stephen King had done his first PSA many years ago about how tired he was of performing postmortems on victims of violent crime and called on us to stop the violence, we had actually embarked on a comprehensive, evidence-based social protection program targeting the vulnerable and at-risk groups in our country, but also extending to the broader population we would not be in the position we are today. But we do not like long-term solutions. We prefer the quick fix. We do not like to deal with the root of our problems. We prefer to blame our predecessor for causing the problem. We do not like being multi-sectoral and bipartisan in our approaches. We want to take all the glory for ourselves to show that we alone could have made it happen. So, we are where we are today. But it is not too late to act. However, honestly, I am yet to see anything coming from official circles that suggests there is an appetite for long-term, comprehensive, all-encompassing approaches to dealing with violent crime. Therefore, last year the number was 74. This year, with almost 7 weeks left before the year ends, it is 63. Fingers crossed, since that appears to be the most effective approach we use these days, it does not climb any higher. But 63 murders in St. Lucia in a year is already 63 murders too many. This week I want to chat briefly about the climate change conference that just ended in Egypt. Every year, these meetings, which are called Conference of the Parties or COP, take place in another part of the world. Last year it was Glasgow, Scotland. This year it was Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Next year it will be the United Arab Emirates. This means every year, anywhere between 25,000 and 35,000 people from all over the globe fly into one city to hold one of these COPs. They've been doing this now since 1995, and the only year when there was no COP was 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The big issues at this year's COP, COP27, were whether the meeting would agree to set up a new funding mechanism for loss and damage, and whether there would be a stronger commitment to reduce the global emissions of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane in order to keep the long-term temperature increase goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius alive. When we speak about loss and damage, we refer to these impacts of climate change to which we cannot adapt. Things like extreme weather events such as hurricanes and slow onset impacts like sea level rise and our oceans becoming more acidic because they're being forced to absorb more carbon dioxide. If a country starts to lose its coastline as the sea encroaches further inland, there is nothing that you can do to adapt. You cannot build a massive seawall all around the island. There are low-lying islands like Tuvalu, Kiribati, Fiji, the Marshall Islands, and some of the islands in the Bahamas that will probably no longer exist by the end of this century. The projections for sea level rise in St. Lucia suggest that if things do not change and they remain on their current trajectory, the ocean will encroach as far inland as the shock roundabout by Massimega. When a hurricane like Hurricane Maria passes over Dominica and causes destruction equal to 226% of the GDP of that country in the space of 24 hours, you cannot adapt to that. This is why the Small Island Developing States, or SIDS as they are called for a special fund to address this. At COP15 in Copenhagen in 2009, which was my first COP, the developed countries made a commitment to provide $100 billion annually to developing countries to help them fight climate change. We are in 2022 and we have not seen anywhere near that level of funding. To add insult to injury, a large percentage of the funds that have been provided have been made available as loans. So, the same countries that cause the climate change problems for us, the problems that we are dealing with that are causing us so much hardship, and that have promised us money to help us deal with those problems, are telling us that we must borrow that money from them. That is the equivalent of someone meeting me in front of my home, beating me up for absolutely no reason, breaking both my legs, and then the court telling me that I must borrow money from the same person who beat me up to buy the crutches that I will need to use if I want to walk again. There's no justice in that. Even if we were to get the promised $100 billion annually, it would not be enough, the United Nations has estimated that the funding needed for developing countries like ours to adapt to climate change will rise to between 160 and 340 billion US dollars every year by 2030, and to between 315 to 365 billion US dollars annually by 2050. And that figure is only for the things to which we can adapt, like building sturdier and higher bridges and roads, and strengthening our public health systems. The cost for loss and damage, which, as I explained earlier, are the things to which we cannot adapt, are estimated by Oxfam to reach somewhere between $290 billion and $580 billion US a year by 2030, and it could rise to trillions of US dollars annually by 2050. Small island developing states have been calling for action on loss and damage since 1992. It was not until COP19 in Warsaw, Poland, that there was an agreement to establish something called the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, or the WIM. That was my second COP as a minister. We had to fight hard and long for that. We almost did not get it. It took an intense huddle in the plenary room, which I found myself in the middle of, on the Saturday evening, a full day after the COP was officially scheduled to end, for us to get an agreement on a mechanism to address loss and damage. That is a full 21 years after the countries that have been recognized as being the most vulnerable to climate change, the small island developing states, first raised the issue. And that really is the problem of the COPs. Every time a compromise has to be made, we, the small island developing states and developing countries, are the ones that must make it. We are always the proverbial Wavette d'Uverpool in these negotiations. When we got to Paris for COP21 in 2015, when I was leading the Caribbean's delegation in these negotiations, once again, we faced very stiff opposition from the United States of America, the European Union, the United Kingdom, Australia, Japan, Canada, Russia, and Saudi Arabia, among other countries, to get loss and damage included as a separate element in the text of the Paris Agreement. Had it not been for the strategic support of the French presidency and some determined work from the awesome team of Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS, negotiators, that every year punch well above their weight in these COPs, we would not have succeeded. But the developed countries remained adamant. There would be nothing in the agreement that spoke of liability and compensation in the section on loss and damage. We were forced to go along with that or lose loss and damage completely. So once again, we compromise. This year at COP27, our negotiators pulled off a miracle of sorts and managed to not only get loss and damage included on the agenda for the meeting, but they were able to get the COP to agree to set up a separate funding mechanism for loss and damage, to compensate those countries that are suffering loss and damage. This is a notable victory. But there's a problem, and I'm sure you can guess where I'm going with this. If the countries that agreed to set up this new fund are the same ones that 13 years ago promised to provide 100 billion US dollars annually and have not done so, what are the chances that we will get the level of funding that is needed to operationalize this loss and damage fund, and also that we will see an access system for those funds that will allow us to be able to get them in a timely manner? One of the problems with the current funding mechanisms, like the Green Climate Fund, is that accessing these funds is a very complex and onerous process. But there is another bigger problem with the outcome of this COP, and it relates to the other big issue that I alluded to earlier. The COP could not agree on language that spoke to a phasing out of fossil fuels, which are the cause of the climate change problem. And this is not surprising, given that there were over 600 fossil fuel lobbyists in attendance. That's actually more than the combined delegations of all the small island developing states. Right now, with the pledges and policies from developed countries that are in place, our planet will warm by 2.7 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. This will be absolutely catastrophic for countries like ours. Hurricanes will get stronger and more deadly. Glaciers at the North and South Pole will melt. sea levels will rise and completely cover some countries. Droughts will become very intense and more frequent. Some plant and animal species will become extinct. There will be more forests and bushfires. Temperatures will become hotter and more unbearable. Vector-borne diseases and respiratory illnesses will intensify. Flash flooding, like we've been seeing recently in St. Lucia, will increase. And our oceans will become warmer and more acidic, which will cause coral reefs to die and marine life to disappear in some places. Cultures and communities will also disappear when this happens. It is irreversible, and no amount of funding will help our children and our grandchildren to be able to enjoy the quality of life that we now enjoy and take for granted. The same rich G20 countries that cannot commit to providing climate finance to developing countries like ours are heavily subsidizing their big oil companies. Since the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015, the G20 countries have provided over $3 trillion in subsidies to fossil fuels. And last year alone, that figure was $200 billion. So they cannot find money to help small islands and other developing countries deal with climate change, but they can continue to subsidize the same fossil fuels that are causing climate change by hundreds of billions of US dollars every year. Therefore, while I applaud my former colleagues for what they achieved in Egypt at COP27, and I continue to marvel at how, despite being grossly outnumbered and out-resourced in almost every category except willpower, stamina, and determination, they still managed to come out of Sharm el-Sheikh with some notable successes. However, I am not optimistic that we have turned a corner in the fight against climate change, or that we are any closer to seeing the types of actions from developed countries that will cause greenhouse gas emissions to reduce by the required 7% every year until 2030 to get the globe to the 1.5 degrees Celsius target that we need. I don't foresee that happening. I also do not foresee any significant increases in the levels of climate financing that will come our way to allow us to make our people, our communities, and our countries more resilient. So, if asked, did COP27 deliver climate justice to the people who are impacted by climate change? My answer is an emphatic no. What it did do is give them enough to keep their hopes alive that salvation is still faintly possible. Thank you for viewing another 2 Cents Tuesday. Have a safe and productive week.
We wish you the very best for the remainder of the week as well. Dr. Jimmy Fletcher, former government minister, here on St. Lucia with his 2 cents today on the climate change war that we continue to face and our war on crime here in St. Lucia. The full episode of Dr. Fletcher's presentation will be available online via our YouTube channel where we stream in HD. Good morning, St. Lucia. And be sure to join us again next week. We'll have another presentation from Dr. Jimmy Fletcher where he will always have some insightful presentations on various issues of national importance. That's the time that we have for today. A few housekeeping matters before we go. The engagement on this morning's program has been fantastic, and we thank you so much for all the submissions. I'll go through some of them tomorrow. Also tomorrow we will be making the trip over to DA country Dominica 6 days from now. 6 days from now, Dominicans will head to the poll in what looks to be a government and independent candidates election. No opposition candidates will partake on the 6th. However, there is a new leader of the opposition. He will be my very special guest tomorrow, as well as one of the leading hoteliers in Dominica. He will also join us on the platform, a pro supporter of the Roosevelt Security Administration, and we'll also have a live connection with a special guest in New York City as well. So that plus so much more tomorrow. The full interview from our very special guest this morning, Mr. James, on issue of national security, the former citizen's his security advisor, was also available on the YouTube channel, so you can watch it in its entirety in case you miss some excellent feedback coming in from that interview. We have established contact with former Commissioner Osbert Regis, who is positively interested in sharing his thoughts. He has a lot to say, and he's very much interested in joining us here. We will update you on that. But next week, interesting discussion with a former police commissioner. I'll perhaps tell you on Friday of this week when we release the official flyer. But he will be with us next week, for certain, a former police commissioner here on the island, as we continue to focus our attention on what can be done to address the crime situation. We've had a good show this morning. I want to thank you for spending time with us. We know you have many options where you can be and spend your time at this early in the morning, but you choose to be here. We thank you so very much. On behalf of all of our corporate sponsors, our management, and the team working behind the scene, thank you for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow, God willing, from 6 to 9 with another edition of Good Morning St. Lucia. My name is Shannon LeBourne. Continue to take good care of yourselves and each other.